Hello, my name is Steven Walton. I'm a Cybersecurity Engineer with MCNC, and we're going to be covering how to test for common open ports and Cipher suites. Additionally, we'll be reviewing a couple of sites where we can interpret these results to get an understanding of what we're looking at and how to make our sites and services more secure. As with any story, we need to have a good beginning, and of course that beginning is going to be you consuming this content. Chances are if you're watching this on a site like YouTube, it's being delivered with HTTPS, and according to Sam Sultano at W3Techs, over 91% of the top 1,000 sites on the internet are currently using HTTPS. Something to keep in mind, though, is as with all things in IT, you have to stay current. The TLS and SSL standards tend to become out of date or they're broken. Every day there's another attack discovered, so it's on us as the site administrators to maintain currency with our configuration to help not only protect us from attack, but to protect our clients who are trusting us to provide them with a secure service. In the following, we'll cover how you can verify just this and how you can make sure that you're offering the most secure service possible. They say the best things in life are free. Well, here's 5 free resources for us. We're going to start off using Nmap, or if you prefer a GUI, you can use Nmap, although we won't be covering that. It's self-explanatory and you can use the same flags I'm using in Nmap. We'll also be using Qualys SSL Labs, which is a much prettier way to check our external sites that are URL resolvable on port 443. We'll also be relying on Mozilla for their TLS guidance. We'll be using their intermediate guidance. The Mozilla SSL configuration generator is handy for a variety of open source solutions such as Apache or Nginx. And finally, we'll be relying on Cipher Suite info for just digging in a bit more into ciphers to find out what part of them may be good or bad. That way we can understand just what goes into a Cipher Suite. While the bulk of this presentation is going to cover Cipher suites, it's important to focus on ports since we're already Nmapping and we'll already have that information. We're going to run just a very basic Nmap scan against insecure.org, which is the hosters of Nmap. And we'll see that this does take some time to run. So when we are looking at ports, we want to make sure that the ports that are exposed to the open internet, or even if it's an internal server, to the internal, members of that intranet, we want to make sure that we have secure ports open. And what does that mean? Obviously, any web traffic that's performed over port 80 is going to be clear text. So even in scenarios where you've got internal services, internal users that you hope you trust, if there's one bad actor in there and you've got a lot of clear text communication going on, that could be compromised. And who knows what that service could be. That could be an internal HR system. That could be something, if we're looking at file transfer protocol instead of SFTP, you could be transferring, sensitive information that way. And even things like DNS, does DNS need to be open on a server? So just by running a quick Nmap scan, we can get an idea of what ports are open on a given host. So here, this is just insecure.org that we keyed in up here. This could be the IP address of the server you're checking. And we can get a quick readout of ports here along with the IP address of, port 22 SSH is open. That's good. We wouldn't want to have Telnet open. Port 53 for DNS. We can see that port 70 here is closed, which is, pretty good. You would much rather have a totally filtered out port that's not even present. You would want to have that service disabled. We can see that we have port 80, HTTP, open. Again, HTTP itself isn't bad. Maybe you have it open because you're doing a HTTPS redirect, or maybe you're serving something that's just not, sensitive at all. But again, we'd still want to use HTTPS because browsers like Chrome are becoming increasingly more sensitive to clear text stuff. And the overall goal here is to run this against your machines. As you'll see in the next section, we'll get Cipher Suite information associated with this. But you want to make sure that you have only the expected ports open, because if you have ports open that aren't needed to be open, like again, a web server port 443 that has Telnet open, you have to ask yourself, is this just misconfiguration? Is this a malicious actor? Why exactly is this open? And if it is open, what is a secure alternative for having that open? Okay, so we have Nmap pulled up here. If you need Nmap, it's a freely available tool. You can just do a quick Google search, download it. If you have Nmap because you prefer a GUI, perfectly fine. The commands will still be the same. Just with Nmap, you get the ability to save these if it's something you'll frequently be using. But first, we'll give an explanation of what our command here is at the top. We start off with sudo because this command is going to request for super user permissions. I am on a Mac. That's primarily because I have the OS fingerprinting, which can be a little bit more intensive. Of course, we have to call Nmap itself. Then we have the -- script, because Nmap does have multiple included scripts that are handy. Here we'll be using 2 of them. We have the SSL enum ciphers, which will check for any cipher suites enabled on any port. We have the comma, because we're calling 2 of them. There's no space here, so please keep that in mind. We then call SSL-cert, simply because if we're doing this, we might as well pull our SSL cert, verify it's not going to expire anytime soon. The -s big V is going to check for what type of service is running on a given port. The -O is the OS scan to find out if this is Windows or Linux or whatever. And then we have MCNC.org. However, this could be anything you have IP connectivity to. This could be the domain name of your website. This could be the internal IP of it, the external IP of it, whichever you need. We'll hit enter. Of course, we give our password. And with the password provided, we let it run. You may get some information like this. No need to worry about that. We'll let it run in real time. You should see this doesn't take a couple of minutes. Occasionally, sometimes you may get an error prompted by Nmap saying run a UDP scan. If you get those, it's simple. It tells you exactly what to change out. When you do have to run a UDP scan, do note that it may take many minutes more. Could be up to 15 minutes depending on, how you're scanning. But as we can see, this information came out pretty rapidly. And we'll just start going top to bottom. We obviously have our scan for our URL and for our IP address here. We see our latency to the device. We see our DNS record, or we see the R recursive DNS record for Amazon AWS. So that tells us where our MCNC.org is hosted. We see of the top 1,000 ports, 998 are filtered. We're listening on port 80, and we're listening on port 443. We are able to determine that we're listening on Nginx 1.16.1. And of course here we have our SSL cert body, which is pretty useful. We get our common name. We get our subject alternate name. We can see let's encrypt. We get to see the key type and bits. We get to see the signature algorithm. We get the valid before and after dates. So when we're looking at the cert portion, we care about having a strong signature algorithm. We don't want something weak like SHA-1. We want a relatively short time period in case the cert gets compromised. Here we have 3 months. You can go up to a year generally as a best practice. If you start going more over that, you risk having a cert get compromised and having to worry with that for longer. Signatures of the cert. The SSL ciphers here are actually pretty interesting because in our instance we have 4 ciphers. Best practice with SSL ciphers, TLS ciphers, is to just permit those that you need. There's no need to have 20 ciphers here. You just need the ones that you know your clients will use. And we'll go over what those look like in a moment when we review SSL Labs and we'll review Mozilla's guidance. Something to keep in mind is when we look at these ciphers here, they're composed of different components, and each component may or may not be strong or weak. Since this is hosted in AWS, and this may be something that your servers have their own idiosyncrasies with their software solutions, is you may not be able to specifically call out every cipher suite you want. So with AWS, we're limited to these 4 in one of their more secure settings. And of course, we have CBC ciphers here, which you may see later on are not exactly the strongest. However, they're not truly compromised. They're sufficient in here, especially for the purposes of our site, which is something else to keep in mind. If your site's handling financial information, sensitive logons, then of course it's much more critical that you have stronger cipher suites. If your site is informational read-only, then perhaps weaker cipher suites aren't the end of the world. Nmap also gives a letter score, as you can see beside these. The letter score is a rough estimate of it. Even though, like I said, these are a little bit weak, they're still being graded an A by Nmap. Take those as guidance, not as hard facts. And of course, we left the -O in here simply because we wanted to get an idea of what service or what server or type of server this could be. So we have Linux here. We have a lot of Linux. Obviously, we know this isn't a Netgear Radiator or Ruckus Embedded. We know we're not running a web server on Google Android. So it's just something you can put in. If it's a web server that you've been alerted to and you're not really sure what it is, you can throw that -O flag in there to get a little bit more idea of it. So up next, we'll be looking at this same information just from SSL Labs. So, as promised, here's Qualys SSL Labs. If the forest theme of the terminal screen was a little bit too harsh, Qualys SSL Labs offers a little bit prettier representation of things. The big exception is that you need 2 requirements before SSL Labs will work. First, the service needs to be externally accessible, resolvable DNS name, and you also have to be listening on port 443. That may or may not be an impact to you. If you prefer to use SSL Labs, fully understandable. You can simply key in your host name here. We can see recently seen, bad, and good, and just overall recently seen. However, for host name, we'll key in mcnc.org. This does take, about as long as the Nmap scan does, if not just a brief moment longer. So for sake of time, I've already ran the report for mcnc.org. And now we can go through and just provide a quick overview. We see the same public IP address for mcnc.org. We can tell when I ran it. If you make a change and you need to run this again, click the Clear Cache button right there at the top. For summary screen, pretty self-explanatory. We have an A because good certificate, good protocol support, key exchange, and cipher strength. You get plenty of links for like documentation. You get DNS certificate authority documentation. As you scroll down, we get that same SSL cert that we cared about previously. We get, plenty of information called out. At the top, we have our SHA fingerprints, common name, alternative name, serial number, valid from and until, how its keys are signed, all of that interesting stuff that we care about. We can scroll past the additional certificates, and we get to the protocol supported. So here we can see TLS 1.2 is highlighted in green, protocol supported is yes, and that's what we look for. Realistically, TLS 1.2 and 1.3 are the only two that you should have enabled. RFC 8996 has officially deprecated, TLS 1.1 and 1.0. SSL 3, of course, we know is totally compromised. Looking at the actual Cipher suites, we see previously I called out, two of these as being strong, two of them as being weak due to the presence of CBC. Again, they're weak, they're not totally compromised. If you were looking at something that was totally compromised, or you were looking at TLS 1.1, 1.0, these would be highlighted in red. What SSL Labs does additionally that's interesting is it gives a handshake simulation to let you know what your different types of devices would be using if they access. If this is a server that's supporting clients, this is handy because you know the way that your various clients will be connecting, and you can do at least a cursory pre-test to ensure that your expected Cipher suites are going to work for the type of devices that your client base has. Further down, we get protocol details. If any of your ciphers are weak to common attacks such as Beast, Poodle, Golden Poodle, Sleeping Poodle, Heartbleed, they'll be called out here. It's important to keep these in mind because if you're vulnerable to any of these are known vulnerabilities. They're very well documented. They're very easy to exploit. So of course you want to take action against those and remove those offending Cipher suites. Finally, you have HTTP requests and other miscellaneous data, as in it took 55 seconds in order to complete. So next, we'll be understanding these results just a little bit more. We'll be using some other services like Cipher Suite Info to understand exactly what we're looking at. All right, picking up where we left off. Now that we've ran our reports and we have an idea of what some of our Cipher suites are, if we want to dig in and find out, okay, why exactly is this one weak? What's wrong with it? We can just simply copy and paste it. And we'll go over to ciphersuite.info. Here, we can copy paste in our Cipher suite, or we can click around the FAQ and the other pertinent information here. We'll click search. And from here, you see we can pull ascending or descending based off of security, TLS versioning, the library, etc. But we're just looking at one, so we'll click into this one. At the top, we have the IANA name, the OpenSSL name, which is important if your service supports OpenSSL, as we'll see quickly when we look at Mozilla. We'll see TLS versions. Some of these do support multiple versions of TLS, or they exist in different versions, so that's important to keep in mind. Going down, we'll see protocol, key exchange, and authentication. We'll also see pertinent blurbs that may or may not impact us, like RSA with keys over 3072 bits. And here we get a alert about our usage of AES 256 cipher block chaining. Since CBC as a whole can be considered sort of weak, we have this attack research going on right here. So we see CBC is vulnerable to plain text attacks in TLS 1.0 and SSL 3 and lower. A fix has been introduced in 1.2 in the form of GCM mode, which if you recall, we do have 2 GCM ciphers here. And GCM should be preferred over CBC, which is important to note because sometimes you can set a server priority of the way the ciphers are presented. And of course we have SHA 384, and we have links to the RFC. Just looking through here, again, we've got news if you want to stay aware of what's going on. We have RFCs if you want to stay on top of other Cipher stuff, or if you just want to search for basic things like all CBC, you could search all CBC type certs. So hopefully this helps you understand not only what Cipher suites and ports you have open, but also why some of them may be weak. Next, we'll look at the quick way of how to find out which ones are strong. Alright, here we get into how do we fix the problems that we have. And this is the Mozilla Security Server-Side TLS webpage. There's, again, plenty of links to, read, understand, dig into on your free time. However, the core of what we care about here is the intermediate recommended section. So we'll go on, click on the intermediate section. We'll automatically get dropped down to the intermediate section. So we can read off that for services that don't need compatibility with the legacy client, such as Windows XP or old versions of OpenSSL, this is recommended. Compatible with nearly every client released in the last 5 years. So that's the part to keep in mind. So long as you're not supporting Windows XP or some old legacy system, you should be good following this guidance. Remember when we looked at Cipher Suite info, and if I just pull one up, we have an OpenSSL name here. That's what you have here. These are in the OpenSSL format. And we see we have our recommended TLS 1.3 Cipher suites that your solution may or may not support, as well as a list of TLS 1.2 ciphers that most modern systems should support. Again, going back to MCNC.org, we're hosted in AWS, where we cannot make that determination specifically to use these. We just get the subset, including the CBC ones, which are not present here. But the main thing to keep in mind is pick from these as many as you can. Protocols we want to use are TLS 1.2 and 1.3. We do not want TLS 1.0 or older in our system. We also get other stuff such as TLS curves, certificate type to use, Diffie-Hellman parameter size of 2048 is important. You can read more in the RFC. Certificate lifespan, 90 days again is the recommended. That's what you saw on mcnc.org. However, 1 year is about as high as you want to go. And it does recommend that cipher preference is permitted by the client. So we end up with something like this, which is a little bit easier to read in an ordered list. And again, these core second column right here is what we really care about. Additionally, we have more rationale, such as being forward secret, being authenticated, calling out PCI if you have to be PCI DSS compliant. We have the elliptical curve recommended over RSA, as they allow Windows 7 using IE11. Cipher suites are strong, so you allow the client to choose. Keep in mind, if you have to include weaker ciphers for some reason, you can make the server determine which ones will be used. However, they do make the point of, hardware accelerated AES on the client. Since XP is no longer supported, we won't include older protocols and ciphers, as well as a couple more, bulleted points here. So with this, you should be armed with now the understanding of how to verify what ciphers you have, why some of those ciphers may be weak, and what ciphers to implement. Next, we'll cover a quick guide of how to generate that configuration and hopefully ease remediation. Alright, so now how to generate some quick and easy configuration. Again, we're back on the Security Server-Side TLS webpage. The configurator is linked in multiple places, so we have the configuration generator here, we have a screenshot of it here. So we'll click into that. And we get a list of common server software here. Now, this is handy if you have these. Generally speaking, if you're running something like an ASA or a Palo Alto or an F5 load balancer, they're all going to have their own unique ways of applying this configuration, so this may or may not work for you. If you do have these, excellent. So we can look at something like Apache, which is, common Linux server. Again, we'll want to go with the intermediate recommended one. We'll have our server version, OpenSSL version. We'll want strict transport security. We'll want OCSP stapling. And then we have basically sample config of which Cipher suites to call out. If this is something that is already an existing service, you may not have to copy paste everything. You may just be able to go in here and change what's pertinent. But again, we have our OpenSSL formatted string, which is really what a lot of this is based on, is just OpenSSL syntax. Right. Now that we have a understanding of Cipher suites, and we've reviewed not only how to see which suites you're offering, but also understanding them and how to do some basic remediation, we'll touch on just a few key points and takeaways to keep in mind. First off, you don't need any more Cipher suites enabled than necessary. Keep it to just a handful that you can keep an eye on, that you can check periodically. That way you're not having to monitor so many different suites. Also, try to understand your clients such that you don't remove a Cipher suite needed for communication. If you're working with a business-to-business connection or some legacy system, it may need some of those Cipher suites that we're not happy to implement. However, we have to implement them. And when we engage those systems, we can look at other ways to work around them. Potentially, we can bring VPN into play to otherwise secure that connection, or we can look at decommissioning that service or pushing our business partner to upgrade their service, because something to keep in mind is that strong ciphers protect everybody. You should also keep in mind that we regularly check these Cipher suites. Something new is happening all the time. Cipher suites are compromised, they're found to be weak, they're just no longer supported. So this is an ongoing task that you should just implement in. If you're a part of MCNC's EdgeGuard service, then we will periodically send you emails and we'll do some of that work for you. We'll make sure that you know if you have weak Cipher suites. However, if this is just something that you're running yourself or something you're not part of the EdgeGuard service, then take it on to yourself just to either set up a cron job with Nmap to run this monthly, quarterly, whatever cadence works for you. On the topic of vendor solutions, again, I mentioned a Cisco ASA, a Palo Alto firewall, F5 load balancer. Sometimes their SSL configuration is a little bit unique to them. That doesn't mean we should ignore it. However, if we're unsure, we can either check their documentation, you can open up a support ticket to them. Additionally, vendor forums or sites like Reddit and Stack Overflow are places where you can either look for somebody who may have already posted the same question you're about to ask, or you can post your own question if your situation's a bit more unique. Ultimately, there's plenty of ways to get guidance out there. MCNC also offers some services that can assist in that way as well. And we do have, the ultimate underpinning of everything we've covered so far is that strong ciphers help protect you and your clients. A weak cipher, if you're using it and a admin logs in, clear text login, or a cipher that's compromised, all of a sudden their credentials are leaked. If you don't have multi-factor authentication in there, suddenly your entire system's compromised. If a client is accessing and their session gets hijacked due to weak cipher suites, all of a sudden that one student or client may be compromised. Just across the board, having strong cipher suites help offer strong services. You don't have to worry about compromise of your systems. At this time, I'd like to thank you for watching the presentation. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to MCNC as a whole through any of the channels listed here. Or if you want to, I'll put my contact information on the next slide. Feel free to reach out to me directly. So again, thank you for watching. My name's Steven Walton, Cybersecurity Engineer with MCNC.org. Feel free to reach out to me at my email address, swalton@mcnc.org.